On the 11th of May 1559, the theologian John Knox mounted the pulpit in Perth to preach against idolatry, a sermon which marked the beginning of the Scottish Reformation and the birth of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. And the location of that particular sermon was no coincidence, with St John's Kirk carrying such reputation and influence that Perth itself had commonly become known as St John's Town. That nickname may have faded for the city itself, but it has, of course, been carried on by its football team. And while the St John in question is most commonly known as John the Baptist, it is another of his monikers that he most appropriately shares with that football side. He is St John the Forerunner. This is the Oh No 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 podcast. I am Duncan Cameron, and joining me tonight for a one-on-one discussion of saints and sinners, ? It's Robbie Weir. How are you, Robbie?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine, obviously. Not the result that we hoped for yesterday, but you've got to really show up for both sides. You can't just show up for the good ones and then not do a podcast when you lose. It's unfortunate nature.
Robbie,
well, there are some...
everybody else from this podcast.
I mean, I'd like to think that we hold our own. To be fair, I have seen some podcasts out there that do disappear for a few weeks, shall we say, and then bundle together episodes, not naming any names, but yes, it's none of the sort of bigger names within the championship. They're all Spiders talk, draw, lose or draw, tend to be pretty consistent, so we've got to be the same. So
this is it. Rain, hail or shine, we'll be here talking shite.
Speaking of talking shite, I just want to say I noticed on the Pine Bovril thread. Now I'm not digging anyone out because obviously they're all individual. Well, I'm digging someone out, but on an individual level, I get that this guy puts in time and effort, which is great. It's his local club, but I've seen that there's a Pars podcast, and they basically got on a junior level referee to go in a micro analysis of Lewis Stevenson and Andy Todd getting some sense knocked into him. Just seemed a very strange thing that I noticed, and I was a bit like, well, whatever suits your fancy.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a thing you could do. I don't know. Let that speak for itself. Actually, let's do that before either of us talk ourselves into trouble. Let's stick to Saturday then. As we saw, we kind of billed it as it was a top of the table clash, but obviously St John's coming out 2-0 winners in the end. I'm going to start off. I'm going to ask a real kind of cliched question for this stage of the season. Have we just seen the champions?
Yes, I would expect so. I would be pretty astonished if they didn't come away with the title. Sometimes clubs come down to this level and they got on a good start and then they drift off, as we saw with Falkirk last season, towards the end of the title. Or you go Dundee United, where they just go from they start off and they have an impressive start. They maybe have a lull and then they go through games where it's not working out for them. So you never know whether that will happen with St Johnstone. But, I mean, it certainly looks like it at the moment. Without ever really getting out of sort of into a higher gear, shall we say, came away from yesterday with the win. So, yeah, keen to hear your thoughts on that one, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think before a ball was kicked, I think we kind of everybody was of the opinion it was a 2-horse race. And the fact that County just haven't started at all, it's really quite remarkable that St Johnstone have played 5 games and they're already clear of like the head-to-heads versus Ross County. County could win all 3 games that those two teams have still to play, and Saints would still be ahead of them, which is pretty remarkable, really. It's a long season. Like, I don't think there's any question that St Johnstone are going to go the year unbeaten, touch wood. But they do just have a lot of quality across the board, in a sense that I don't think there's anybody there who's like a real proper standout. I mean, I think probably the best example, I think fairly widely acknowledged, their best player so far this season has been Josh McPake,
Yeah,
who within the last 12 months was like a joke figure. You know, they've not rocked up with a load of Galacticos, but what they do have is a lot of players, I think more than 11 of them, who are like a notch above your kind of average championship player. And that is a good way to go about your business, really.
yeah.
You know, for all that we've been joking about all the players they've been signing and all this kind of stuff, pretty much everybody they've brought in is solid in the championship at best. So if you do have a 24-man squad or whatever, there's resilience there. I think they were missing 5 players yesterday.
I mean,
I don't know
even
whether you're...
seemingly, I was reading that apparently someone was speaking to Jamie Cullen and he was actually fit. He could have played the game if he needed to, but he just didn't even make the squad just because of the numbers. That was someone that was starting for us,
Yeah,
what,
absolutely.
4 or 5 months ago. So
I think this is it. Like the other obvious example is Sam Stanton. Can't get a game. We know football-wise what his quality is. And even like Regan Tunnelly is potentially down to third choice back now. And I mean, personally, I think he's a great player for this level.
Yeah.
So, and it's that, as I say, you know, I made this comparison yesterday, but like Dundee United came down and they had Louis Moult, and you're like, wow, he's so much better than this level. But then you always have this, County have got it with Ronan Hale, where you're like, you've got this one guy who's so much better, everything ends up kind of revolving around them. Whereas St Johnstone don't really have that. You can pretty much take anybody out of that team and there's somebody of reasonably equivalent quality to come back in.
I think as well, when you look at their side overall, I think that we've got quite different dynamics as to who they can bring in. So almost in a sense, if you take their forward options, I mean, no one knows really much about the boy from Wales that they signed because he's barely had a game because he's very unfortunate injury. I know that they brought on the boy from Livingston.
Yeah, and Regan Tunnelly get the last 2 minutes.
Sidibe, obviously, you could see his quality. Very, very good player yesterday. Caused absolute carnage at the back at certain points. There were a few occasions, and it was just down to raw attributes that he has. You've got Ikpuezu, who's sitting on the bench that they can bring on, and he brings on a completely different quality. He's going to be a handful for defenders. And then they've got the guy from Livingston that can use across the front line, and the guy from Wales, as well as Jamie Cullen. You're sort of looking at all these different types of forwards as to who they can bring on at different points if they do want to use them when they're all fit. Again, they've not got them all at the moment, and I think that probably showed yesterday is that I'm sure St Johnstone fans would be probably quite open to admit that they didn't play the best game. Not that they're going to care because they walked away with a 2-0 win.
Yeah. And I think it's just, there's a couple of players there who really, I think are really interesting examples. Josh McPake's probably one, actually, given where he was previously. The other one I was thinking about was Rhys McAleer.
Yeah.
Like, has never looked great. He's always been fine, but he's never looked kind of outstanding. He's not one that when St Johnstone signed him, you're like, oh, bloody hell, they've got Rhys McAleer. But when you see him in the games, we've seen them previously, they were on the telly against County, and then again yesterday, he just suits that team. Dovetails really nicely with Jason Holt. And again, this is, we're kind of getting in, I assume you're going to join me with this, we're getting in all our St Johnstone praise in the first 5 minutes, so we can just not do it again. But I think it is testament to what Valakari's done with that squad building, that somebody like Rhys McAleer looks a notch or two above kind of championship level, because he hasn't really before, but he just fits into that side really well.
Yeah.
So, as I say, in terms of, I don't know, I don't really see where their fatal flaw might come from, if you know what I mean.
I don't really see it either. I mean, even at the back, like, I think when you saw the signings of Boys and Baird from Morton, you were thinking, right, okay, they're solid championship defenders. But then they bring in Diabiate, who, complete unknown, he was absolutely brilliant yesterday, Diabiate. I thought he was just stand out head and shoulders above everyone else in terms of the pitch. Like, just the ability to get back and just completely outmarshal players, know when to win fouls, know when to sort of like give players a bit of a rough time. And that really made it difficult for us getting into that final third in particular. So much so that I did think that there was slight tweaks as to how we were using some of the players, like Paul McMullen, for example. But yeah, just he looked standout. I would be very surprised if there's not clubs higher up the food chain, because again, obviously, we're saying that St Johnstone come out and they can have their sort of money that they'll spend, which rightfully so. They've run at a net profit over the last few years, and I know that there's the whole story behind that. But then you look at your bigger clubs like your Dundee United, your Hearts, Hibs, etc. You should be looking at a player like that and sort of saying, well, potentially what can he bring to the table?
Yeah, I think so. It's obviously, as you say, it's early days for St Johnstone. You never know with these things. It wouldn't be the strangest thing in the world if they dropped off a bit, but it's just on the face of it. Again, it's like, I mean, I keep using County as an example. They're a terrible example. They've done really badly.
Yeah.
But, if Ronan Hale trips over his Doug Lamora and can't play football for 6 months, County are in real bother. Whereas St Johnstone just don't really have that same dynamic. They don't seem to have like the one guy that they really need.
I think it comes down to the sort of names factor. Like, County bring in a lot of big names that you do say, like, oh, they're going to struggle at this level. But then when they're put to the test, I mean, probably the best example so far is Gary Mackay-Steven. Like, he's just been, I mean, has he done anything yet? Like, I don't think has he had any goals or any assists? I'm not too sure, but yeah.
Well, this is it. Again, you look at County and you think, if everybody in that team is fully fit and performs to their highest level, they could be unbelievable. But it's like the opposite of Leslie's Swiss cheese model. It's like, how often is that going to happen that all those guys are going to do that at the same time? So many guys. They signed Scott Fraser this week, and you're like, yeah, he's so good for this level, but he's not played football in 2 years.
Yeah.
Ross Docherty's kind of the same. Ross Docherty's got one of these things where he's like, oh, it turns out my shoes were too small, which you're like, okay, that seems like a weird thing to be causing so many problems in the career of a professional athlete, but okay, we'll take your word for it. As you say, Mackay-Steven, there's a lot of these guys.
It reminds me, it's very reminiscent of when we had Barry Smith as our manager and we brought in sort of Greg Spence and Liam Buchanan. It's like marquee signings right after they both scored about 30 goals. Yeah. And then it was kind of like we shoehorned them with Lewis Vaughan into the team, but then it just didn't work because you had like 3 players that had been a focal point within a team. And Lewis Vaughan obviously got a high number of goals that season. And not that Spencer Buchanan disgraced themselves by any stretch of the imagination, but it just didn't really work because you're trying to shoehorn
never worked as a unit.
Yeah.
That's it. So I'd say I think I was probably more impressed with St Johnstone in the League Cup game. I think they sort of played better, but I don't know if that was maybe we played into their hands a little bit more in that game. But we all know what the League Cup's like. It can be quite deceptive. It seems like an odd signifier sometimes. But when you look at the way they started the league, I mean, all right, they've only played 5 games, but I suspect that they'll win it fairly easily now. I mean, would I be at all surprised if Ross County, went unbeaten in quarter 2 or quarter 3 or something? Like, nah, not really. They've got the players to do it, but I just can't see them overhauling this gap that St Johnstone have already got. I just don't think they're going to drop that many points.
I don't think they will, but I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that their star kind of shines a bit too brightly, and that Valakari gets like noticed by another club, like say a club down in England or things, come in for him and sort of chuck silly money, because we know that clubs think, certainly St Johnstone do, because they've just got over $500,000 for Mackenzie Kirk, which is fair play. Again, it's there's levels to this, and there is always a bigger fish out there. Valakari is going to be a manager that a lot of clubs will want to get in if they get the opportunity to. So, and again, we say it for every player or manager at this level, there is a price for everyone. There is always that point where the club will just say, yeah, look, you know what? he's great, but at the same time, this is going to set us up quite nicely. Not that I think that St Johnstone are in a dire need compared to other teams. Like, for instance, if we'd had a similar start and a club down in England that came in for one of our players.
Yeah, so I think we've probably said enough nice things about St Johnstone there. I'm sure we'll come back to certain aspects of it, but let's go through the kind of the game itself. I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts on probably more so actually on the kind of overall pattern of some of the kind of elements of this game rather than the specific bits and pieces. But we'll use that as our structure, as we always do. So really, the first thing, in terms of starting 11, we knew there would have to be a change to some degree. With Josh Mullen's suspension from last week. Barry Robson, as is probably his want, kept that fairly minimal. So obviously just the one change in the personnel. Josh Mullen went out for Lewis Vaughan, and he went to the back four. So Ross, dear me, I've got all my names backwards today. All of them. Jordan Doherty moved across to right back. So first of all, any particular surprise that that was the path that Robson went down? And more over the kind of piece of the game, do you think that was do you think it was the right choice? Do you think that worked effectively compared to what the alternatives might have been?
I was quite surprised that we switched up some sort of the formation that we've been using into sort of using four at the back. And because of that, when he if you'd said to me, right, we're going to change it to play, well, or just keep the formation the same, you're automatically thinking, right, Darragh O'Connor's going to come in and he'll be in line for his first start. But again, we've not seen him yet. And instead, look, Jordan Doherty's a very malleable footballer.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Exceptionally flexible in terms of the positions that he can play on the pitch, which is very, very much to his credit. He didn't look out of place there yesterday. Got maybe tangled up a little bit at points, but St Johnstone have got very good wingers, and he still held his own. I don't think he was at fault for any of it. In the group chat for the buses, he's by far and away sort of lead for man of the match for yesterday from their perspective. Lewis Vaughan coming in. Yeah, look, I'm sure it's been a frustrating season for both him and Jack Hamilton. I think either of them could have been a potential shout to come into the team if you were to go down that route of the centre forwards changing up. Vaughan's got the track record; he can provide moments of magic. But did it really work yesterday? I mean, obviously it didn't because we didn't get off the score sheet. He did have some. He did have some really good opportunities. The first one in particular in the first half. I mean, in hindsight, it might not have been the best choice, but look, sometimes you've got to gamble, and you never try these things, and you'll never know. So, yeah.
Yeah, based on the way that we set up, I'm kind of happy with it, to be honest. I'm not overly sold on Jack Hamilton without another forward up with him. So I think if you were going to go to the back four and then actually say, right, we're going to rejig kind of everything and actually play two forwards, then absolutely Jack Hamilton needs to be in that. But I'm just not totally convinced with him sort of in place of Vaughan in that system that we played yesterday. I just don't know that you're necessarily getting that much kind of extra out of that. But you do have the same as we saw last week at Capel, really, where there was a concerted effort for the Rovers to be a little bit more direct. Choose the sort of euphemism that you want for that, bypassing the midfield or whatever it is. We were banging long balls into channels at times. So playing Vaughan in that sense, you've got a more natural target in Jack Hamilton, obviously. Although it looks very much like the plan in the first half was getting McMullen in behind, and particularly in the first kind of 20 minutes or so, the linesman was the biggest hindrance to that.
I mean, even with Paul McMullen, we saw it within the first half alone, how much more of an improved performance it made, and it was really marked. Just when you put him out wide and you just him in that wide area, because he was quite happy going up against, was it Folds, the left back, I think?
Yes.
Yes. He just looked really happy to take the ball on and just go past him. He seemed to be linking up well with Jordan Doherty, and sort of carrying it forward. And by proxy, then in turn, you get more out of Lewis Vaughan and the surrounding players. But yeah, just the choice to go long, I can understand really why it sticks in the craw for a lot of fans. I just don't think it suited particularly with who St Johnstone had at the back. They were just eating it up all day. Whereas when we were going a bit more, and we saw it straight away, it was almost like that Vaughan chance was like actually we can do it this way, and sort of the direction that we were taking. It just saw a big improvement, albeit we'll come on to the St Johnstone goal after the Vaughan chance.
Yeah, because I mean, I think if, we've talked about St Johnstone as if they're 1974 Brazil there. Like, I wasn't overly impressed by either of their fullbacks, actually. In a relative sense. I think if that's where potentially you could get a bit of change out of them. I thought is it Adam Forrester? Is that his first name?
Yeah.
Boy for Hearts played right back. Basically, all the chances that we're going to talk about, all the Rovers' chances, are not just kind of on his side. It's like, that's where you need to be. If you think about, the Vaughan volley, the Easton volley, Hamilton has a header that goes in. Yeah. There's Hamilton running behind, he cuts it back for Vaughan. Like, all of these are on that side. And I thought in particular, it felt like there's almost like that's what we're trying to do, trying to play from that. But it is very difficult when obviously the two centre halves are so happy to win their headers. So, like, yes, you might be able to get down the sides and get the ball across, but you're having to really try and go, coast to coast, try to bypass the central defence entirely, which is a tall order. And again, I think that's where your argument for potentially, could you play Jack Hamilton instead? I think when you're putting him up against Diabate and Jack Baird, it's very, very difficult. I think that's where when you put Vaughan in, it's more, is he going to drop 10 yards off those guys and then try and turn and play balls into the channel and all that? But I don't know. I think early on, it just never felt too coherent.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It never felt like we quite cracked a proper kind of route to goal. But, I mean, worth saying, I don't think St Johnstone did either. There's very early on, Josh McPake hit the bar from, kind of cutting in off that other side. But really, other than that, the early stages I thought were quite... I don't know if scrappy is the right word, because scrappy kind of makes it sound like neither team knew what they were doing. It was almost like they were just quite evenly matched. And then, as you say, the first big chance of the game, setting aside that McPake hitting the bar, is Vaughan volleying over. And it was the first time that the ball was kind of put in behind for Paul McMullen when he was onside, for one thing. Puts the ball over. How... Do you think Vaughan's done anything wrong here? I mean, obviously he's done it wrong. He's put it over the bar. But, technique-wise, are you slaughtering him for that? I saw it described as a sitter. How do you feel about that?
Nah, I disagree. I'm just getting it up on my phone now, but I wouldn't put it into the category of sitter by any stretch of the imagination, because I think it's a really hard take. Like, I mean, Dylan Easton does really well. It's a good ball from Ross Matthews over the top to then feed in McMullen, and he puts it across, but the ball's kind of coming across Vaughan in terms of that he has to adjust his body. So I'll give him a degree of sympathy there, that I think that he knows what he's trying to do, but to be able to sort of capably pull that off is a very, very high standard of football that you need to be at. And just with the angles and where it is, I feel like it was a very difficult chance. Probably made a lot more... it's a lot more difficult than it looks at first value, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you. You may have guessed in the loaded terms I put that question to you. But yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's very easy to look at a freeze frame and go, oh, he's 8 yards out from the goal. But he's picking a ball out of the sky. and
he's got to wait for it to drop as well. That's the thing. Like, you can see him like standing for a good second or so while it's like looping in the air.
I think the real, like, with hindsight, alternative option is if he almost tries to catch it in his instep and just put it back across the goal. But if anything, that's almost a harder technique, because you can really see that popping just straight into the goalkeeper's hands. All you've done is take all the pace off the ball.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, the technique he's got quite over the ball. Like, when you compare it to the Easton one, just very, very similar. Like, Easton's is wild and is almost a better illustration of just how difficult that is.
Or the Stevenson one as well, where he just completely flaps at it. Which, again, Lewis Stevenson has his position on the pitch, and it's left wing back for a good reason. It's a very tough one that because it does look a lot closer, I think that's probably made people question it. But yeah, I completely agree with you.
But that, by the way, is just one of the ones where, like, I think Adam Forrester, if that goes in, Simo Valakari is going to take Adam Forrester's head off at halftime. It's very, very similar to the goal we lost up at McDermott Park, and J. Rowe was on the other side, and he's kind of never quite gets back. But I think the big difference is that with that one, we were playing a back five. Rowe was the wing back and should have more license. I just think it's kind of ragged. I don't know. I'm casting aspersions based on a very small sample size. That to me feels like a guy who's played a lot of youth football, not played a huge amount of first team football, and just isn't quite switched on to that. Because you can see Jack Baird is not. Jack Baird's not thinking, right, I've got Lewis Vaughan, he's my guy. He's expecting his fullback to be tighter in. So obviously it's a very, very different game if that does go in. And it becomes a very different game that it didn't, because St Johnstone score pretty much immediately after this. And as I said, there weren't a huge amount of chances in the game for either side, really. And Barry Robson says in his post-match that the difference is St Johnstone, they've got some of that team are Premiership quality players, and they'll punish your mistakes. And this, I mean, it's probably a minor mistake as far as these things go. Sean Byrne just wants a little bit too much time on the ball, but he is 10, maybe 15 yards inside St Johnstone's half. And I think we always actually looking to do is just play a pass back to Callum Fordyce. And I feel like this is something that I say about Dylan Easton all the time, but I'm going to apply it to Sean Byrne as well. Sean Byrne has to be able to take those chances.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what he does. That's, if you think about all the good stuff that Sean Byrne does, and that he gets a big roar and a big clap and a big cheer for doing, it's that. It's bring the ball in, taking his time, almost taking more time than you think he should, and 9 times out of 10, it comes off, and that's why he's better than a lot of other players. But the 1 time out of 10 that doesn't come off, he's going to get caught on the ball, and then this time it's just so happens the way it is. I mean, it's Rhys McAleer I was talking about before. He does very, very well, and then just plays the pass. I'm not convinced it would have made any difference if they didn't, but Fordyce and Hanlon are both almost in a kind of pincer movement, both trying to just cut out the pass.
Yeah.
And neither of them can quite get there.
I'm going to stick up for Callum Fordyce at this point, because it's been a lot that, like, he's slide tackled his own player, but nobody would have any complaints, and everyone would be saying, he's done so well if he connects with the ball and he can just get it in any direction. But as it is, the ball's just so good from McAleer that it gets straight through, and it's basically a perfect pass for Stevie to run onto. So I would have I've got a degree of sympathy again with Callum Fordyce there. And I think it's just victims of a high line in the way that we play. Like, it's just, against Morton, St Johnstone had so much of the ball and they created chance after chance after chance, but they didn't do that against us. But I think that on days like yesterday, it shows the value of, like, if you're playing St Johnstone, you're going to have to bury your chances. You're effectively going to have to be able to take those opportunities and just to be able to give yourself that sort of distance. Ironically, Morton did that. They needed to do it. They got it once, and then they didn't need to do anything else for the rest of the game. And St Johnstone just basically knocked on the door. It was like a tide just going back and forth. Whereas we had the opposite effect. We had a gilt-edged chance. We didn't score, and then they go straight on the pitch. And it's almost fortuitous. But yeah, you've got to give them their credit. And again, Josh Ray, he does get a touch to it. It's just unfortunate that he didn't be able to stop it. It would have been a really good save if he had, but it's a good finish from Sidibe. He's taken his goal well, given that he was in a goal drought, and he had so much time to think about it as well.
Yeah, I think people listening will have realised by now that neither of us are clearly in a mood to slaughter the Rovers after yesterday. I think that's pretty apparent, and that goal I think is a very good example. There's nobody there that I'm really like, bloody, you really should, like. I think Byrne is obviously he's the kind of biggest error in that he loses the ball, but as I say, I think it's forgivable. I think, as I say, 9 times out of 10 he doesn't lose the ball, and of the ones where he does, it's probably then back in Rovers' possession within 5 seconds. It just so happens it's a perfectly weighted pass, and it's a perfectly threaded pass as well. And because it draws for Dyson Hanlon. It's not just that it's in the right direction, it's the right weighting. It also just draws those two through. And obviously, again, it's Sidibe's got the advantage of he's got nothing to think about. As soon as he sees that ball pop up, he's got one job, and it's just to sprint towards the goal, and I suppose to keep himself onside. Whereas you can see it in the replay that, like, Hanlon and Fordyce both have to have a split second of, right, who's where's the ball going? Do I need to step up to McAleer? Do I need to go with a man? And that's all it takes, because Sidibe's got the pace that he's through by the time that's happened, effectively. And actually, even if at that first sign of danger, Fordyce and Hanlon don't go towards the ball, even if both of them immediately go with Sidibe, I still don't think they're going to get, because the time will take to turn as much as anything. Even setting aside the natural pace of the three of them. And then, as you say, Josh Ray is very unfortunate. I think with that, it's you get something on it. And again, sometimes that'll come back out, sometimes that'll go through. There's actually one very early on when he's out his box. He comes out to kind of chase down a loose ball, and he kind of gets a contact on it, but not really. And that time the ball comes with him, and he sort of gets away with it, and it just so happens with the goal it's the opposite. But really, you could flip those two around for all anybody kind of knows about it. But certainly it's a mark of the quality for Sidibe as well, to be fair, that he just goes through and finishes that. Because again, a lot of strikers at this level, and it sounds silly to say it, a lot of strikers at this level just don't put those away with that kind of confidence. They take a little bit too much time, and as you said, that then, I think it then obviously sets the tone for the rest of the game, and it's something that we talk about a lot, usually when the Rovers have won a game relatively narrowly, which is that after this point, we're going to talk about more Rovers chances than we are St Johnstone chances. But the vital context is, obviously, from this point on, St Johnstone were in the lead. There was no onus on them. The onus was on us.
Yeah.
And it's something I think we'll come back to when we talk about some of the kind of post-match comments. Next thing I've got in my notes from this is, I think possibly certainly the most eye-catching example of the defending from Czech Diabate that you were talking about. Yeah. This is Paul McMullen running through, and it looked like he was kind of clean through on goal, and it's a recovery run and then a kind of last ditch challenge from Diabate. Now, looking at the highlights, it's very, very clear that this is a brilliant tackle. But at the time, did you think this was a penalty kick?
I did. It was one where I kind of thought, like, yeah, that's one I'll want to see back. And then as soon as you do see it back, you're like, well, he's got that perfect. And again, we're fortunate enough in our group chat of people watching via Raith TV who are like, yeah, that's a great tackle. Like, I know that there was sort of some questions about it, but he's done it absolutely perfectly, and it kind of set the tone for his game as to, like, if you are getting through, I'm still going to chase you down and be able to pull off a perfect tackle, which, fair play.
That's exactly what it is. It's because McMullen's got it sort of on his right foot, and Diabate's coming in from his left side. You know, from the other end. Because I was like, that's either a foul or it's the best challenge you've seen in ages. And it turns out it's the best challenge you've seen in ages. Like, he just
Really
does
annoying
enough
that.
to get across him. But you can't really say fairer than that. That's just really, really good defending. Because again, I don't think McMullen really does anything wrong. You know, again, with perfect hindsight, you sort of the only argument is, well, he needs to take it earlier. But if that's any number of other championship defenders, he's got the time for that next one. So you can't really say fairer than that. The next. The only other thing I've got my first half notes here is Dylan Easton has a sort of little kind of jinking run, and then it's a shot on his left foot that the boy Stewart gets down, and I mean, he gets behind it. There's never really any risk that it's going to end up the goal. But I thought it was a good example of that kind of portion of the game. As I said, before the goal, really, the Rovers were, doing okay, but it didn't have too much going on. But actually, it felt like, in a way that you don't often see, it seemed like the goal seemed to change the Rovers' fortunes as much as anything. They seemed to actually going behind, seemed to G them up a wee bit, and they were doing a bit more, acting with a bit more kind of purpose. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair, but it's not a habit that you obviously want to see us get into, because we had the same again at Firhill, where it took us to go 2-0 down and then a system change to be able to then actually get back into it. I think we were far too direct before the goal, and we I don't know what in particular changed, whether Barry Robson sort of said, like, okay, McMullen try and drift out wide, and then we'll obviously go on the other side as well. But yeah, just it did seem to be like we almost got galvanised by it, and it was like a wake up of, okay, we need to get back into this game and be able to chase it. And again, I should say, St Johnstone, they're in the lead. It's completely fair play to them that they know that they can hit us on the counter, as we saw throughout the game, to be able to pull it in, because they've got that there. They know that they've got probably one of the quickest forwards in the league against two sort of centre backs that are in their twilight years of their career. So yeah, it was. It definitely allowed us the opportunity to be able to create more chances. I think that was down to our side in terms of getting more on the ball, doing a bit more, taking a bit more responsibility with it. But yeah, it's just frustrating that we couldn't get it across the full 90.
I feel like Callum Fordyce would want me to step in here and say twilight years is maybe a little bit harsh. What, 33? I don't know. Speaking of someone who's 35, I think 33 is twilight years. Come on.
I'm not so sure on that, Duncan. I'll agree to disagree with you. I would say that. I mean, what's Paul Hanling, 35?
I tell you right now, I think Paul's a little bit older than that, is he not?
Lou Stevenson, 37.
Oh no, he is 35. Oh yeah, so hang on. No, I'm not having twilight years for that either. I think you need to be older than me to be twilight years. As much as I look a little bit more grizzled than any of these guys.
Grasping onto you, you've.
Right, that takes up to half time. Any particular? I mean, at half time, how are you feeling about that 45 minutes that you'd watched, particularly compared to how you thought the game might have been, kind of beforehand?
I mean, it was disappointing to be behind at half time, given that it felt like St Johnstone, like they were so efficient in the sense that they had two chances basically. They had the one off the bar and then they scored, and then they were just like, okay, that's fine, that works for us. But again, it's there's obviously the statistical analysis of the game, and people look at, what was the possession, what was the shots, etc. I know that Barry Robson touched on that they usually have a lot higher in terms of their possession, and we brought it a lot lower yesterday. But ultimately, they did the damage and they got into their lead. Frustrating. I don't think that we'd shown an account of us that was probably as good as what we'd maybe hoped, but at the same time, like it wasn't like we were out of the game. It wasn't like it was an embarrassment. I think that it's probably a mark in terms of the standards that this team have set, that we can go into yesterday just thinking, look, I think as a fan base, we probably look and hope that we'll play a bit less direct and a bit more in terms of getting the ball on the deck. And I know that's easy for us to say because there's two teams in the game. St Johnstone very, very good at pressing as well. You saw that with their midfield. So I think there was probably a degree of frustration, but at the same time, you never felt that we were out of it. So there was always that hope in the second half. And you did think, like, look, we've had a few chances. Why not create more? And they did that to their credit.
Yeah, on this point of it being direct, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I'm quite happy with it. I don't care about like I don't have a kind of prejudice against it. Like one of the very most enjoyable Rovers teams for me was when we just had Greg Taddy and John Baird, and we were just battering the ball up, letting Taddy go and chase it down, and then seeing what fell out. Like I don't have a sort of philosophical bias one way or the other. I'm a very simple person. If we win a game at the end of the day, I'm quite happy. I couldn't care less how it came about. And I understand that we didn't win, and so that then kind of draws questions about style and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know, not quite a concern, but before the game, I thought there was a chance that it might look more like the game at McDiarmid Park, where particularly first half, I thought there were several degrees between the sides, where, I mean, it was a cup game, but it looked like a cup game between a side from like the division above, effectively. Thinking also about the second time we went to Tannadice in that league season. So with the first game, we'd won it and Dylan Easton had scored. And the second game, again, it was like a really professional performance from a side from the division above. And they just kept the ball off us and we didn't lay a glove on them. There was a little bit of me that was like, almost like are St Johnstone that good? Like, are they actually in the mode of a side who will come to you, keep the ball off you, knock it about, and beat you 2 or 3-0. I know we scored up at McDiarmid Park as well, but obviously it wasn't that. It was a very competitive game. And there was a frustration at half-time that we were getting beat. Of course there was, but I don't think you have to change a huge amount of things for that to be 1-0 the other way. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because this is also my view at kind of full time as well. But I felt kind of similar to the way I did at Firhill, where it was like, yeah, we lost, but like there's losing and there's losing. And I wasn't particularly disheartened. Like I didn't think that we'd lost the game or we were losing the game at half time because we'd done loads of things wrong. It was like, yeah, we did some good stuff, some stuff not so good, and we just happened to get punished for the not so good stuff. And as we said at the start, that in large part is because of St Johnstone's quality.
I agree. However, it's just one where, look, with the way the personnel that we'd set up with in the first half and how it started, I just don't think it was best suited to utilising them. I think that changed so much when Jack Hamilton came on, because he then immediately offered us so much more on an outball, and to be able to, I thought it was terrific yesterday, Jack Hamilton. Just so good in terms of the way that he was holding up the ball, bringing others into play, and just being able to utilise that. Now, at the same time, I'm sure that's not the game that he wants to be playing. And I know that he said before that when he first signed, he was like, I don't want to be bracketed as a target man. But then at the same time, we've got nobody else that's like him in terms of that. And I'd be very sceptical as to whether Josh Gentles is going to be the player that's going to step up to that. I think that Josh Gentles, again, we'll speak about them probably later on. I just feel like with the parts that we had out on the pitch, I just think that it wasn't the best way to utilise them. I'd be intrigued to know, in terms of like if you ever spoke to the squad, what their opinion of that would be. But again, that's obviously what Barry Robson's saying to go out and play. They're doing that, and as well as getting results. You don't have any complaints when you lose. You've got to temper your expectations as well, rightfully, as you say. Like, that was by no means a cakewalk for St Johnstone yesterday, I felt. And you've got to take swing with the punches as such. And you're going to have losses during a season, and St Johnstone are a very good team. So yeah, I can understand your perspective, but I would say as well that I do feel that there was a degree of frustration there that with some of the players out there on the pitch that I felt that might have done a bit more.
So this is interesting because I think we need to talk about this Josh Ray save for a second, and then we'll come back to it because I have some thoughts that kind of chime in with the same themes. But we might disagree slightly actually on a part of the next part. But just before we do get to that, right after halftime, I thought St Johnstone came flying out the traps.
Yeah.
First kind of 10 minutes, actually, until Jack Hamilton came on, to be fair. I thought they started the second half really quickly. Didn't think we'd settled particularly well. And yeah, as I say, the sort of highlight of that period was the free kick that comes in. I'm still not sure whether Adama Sidibe actually gets a touch on this or not, but it's almost irrelevant in the way that as it's swinging in, Josh Ray has to wait to find out whether it's going to take a touch or not. He can't commit either way. And then the only way I could think to describe this is it's a Davy McGurn-esque save as he tips that away. I mean, a big game for Josh Ray, really, given the noise last season around his performances for St Johnstone. And I mean, over the piece, I thought he acquitted himself pretty well, and that's certainly the pick of the bunch. Yeah,
absolutely. He's done tremendously well because I think it falls into the cliche, but he probably sees it quite late, and to be able to hook it away, a really, really good save. We know what we're getting with Josh Ray. I think we're all quite happy that he's back at Stark Park, and I know that St Johnstone fans are going to have their natural biases towards or against him as such. But yeah, it's serviceable at this level, I think. And it's, again, we'll talk about the second goal when it comes around, and I get that there is an aspect there, but I feel like we're going to pick up more points with him than they are compared to where we were at. He's done really well with that save though at the free kick, just to be able to sort of tip it wide and adjust his body for it. Yeah.
So as I say, so that basically that kind of 10-minute period, I mean, possibly St Johnstone's best period of the game actually. Just more so in the way they looked rather than real kind of end product from it. But then 55th minute, Jack Hamilton comes on, as you say, for Paul McMullen. Now, the bit I wanted to pick back up on this was there's then a 15-minute period before the next substitution, which is Richard Chin coming on for Sean Byrne, 71st minute. Now, with the exception of Easton's volley, I think comes in that 15-minute period. But my kind of overriding thought at that point, I thought we were a bit disjointed. And it wasn't Jack Hamilton's fault by any means at all. It's not Hamilton coming on that causes the issue. I thought it was McMullen going off.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like we couldn't get the ball forward. It felt like we'd getting so focused on playing balls in for Paul McMullen to run onto and all that kind of side of that was the whole plan for progression, that we then kind of struggled to adapt to that a little bit. And then when Richard Chin came on, it almost completely reverted back again. And that was then we actually really started to pick up again. And to your point, I thought at that stage, Jack Hamilton really kind of came into his own. I don't know if am I on my own there? Did you feel like Hamilton just really had that kind of more or less instant impact?
No, I think that I'm very much in the camp with you.
Right, okay,
Albeit I
good.
felt
I'm
that,
pleased.
for me, I thought that Barry Robson actually got the change wrong. I wouldn't have brought off Paul McMullen. I would have brought off Lewis Vaughan. Now, Lewis Vaughan's a goal scorer and he works well as part of a two up there with Jack Hamilton. But I just felt like yesterday wasn't really his day. And that me and Scott were talking about, I've just went back, and to be fair to Scott, he can't defend himself here because of his poor internet service provider that's over in Holland, seemingly. But I sort of said that, like, I wouldn't have been taking McMullen off. He was saying that he just felt that he was poor in terms of like constantly being offside, and then his sort of final ball maybe being a bit lacking, and that Hamilton was obviously more likely to get a goal. But then I just felt that with it, that just McMullen, just when we moved him out wide, he was getting so much more joy in terms of the game. So if we could have brought on Hamilton at the expense of someone else, then probably Lewis Vaughan's going to be the sort of target there. Again, love Lewis Vaughan to bits, but it just didn't feel like it was particularly working for him. And if you can get McMullen delivering balls in for Jack Hamilton, that's kind of your combination that you're hoping for. Like, McMullen's already shown that he can get wide, he's got pace, and that he'll cause a nuisance, and he's got the ability to get in decent balls for a centre forward. So yeah, it just felt like one of the two had to go, and I felt that Barry Robson got it wrong yesterday. But again, it's easy to say with hindsight.
Yeah, it's a slightly wider observation than just yesterday, but it does feel like we're a funny set up side sometimes. So like that one chance, as I say, that comes in the period after McMullen's gone off before Chin comes in, Hamilton does brilliantly for that. Really, really does. He's kind of on the edge of the box and he's holding the ball up, and he manages to get it back to Jordan Doherty, puts the crossover, and as it goes to Easton, who then puts it over the bar. Again, difficult chance. It's another one where you're talking about picking a volley out of the sky. But so Easton's at the back post. He's as Adam Forrester's actually given him more space than he should. But the boy in the middle, who you're saying sort of is in the kind of prime position for that, is Ross Matthews.
Yeah.
Because the build-up, we've got two strikers in the park, but Vaughan's out in the corner and Hamilton's on the edge of the box, and it's like, even when we've got two strikers in the park, we don't seem to be particularly strikery with them. And it's like last week at Capello, when Hamilton came on and he was playing on the left of the three. You think, like, it just seems a little unorthodox. You'd think almost by default he would go into the middle. So again, it's just a kind of a point on that.
And again, not to slaughter Lewis Vaughan by any stretch of the imagination, but if you look at that chance, Lewis Vaughan's actually wide right. So it's like, again, you're going to want like someone to be on an overlap, and you can see exactly what he's doing. It's just one way.
I suppose that's what I'm thinking. Like, if you've got Chin on the park there, or McMullen, they're probably in that pocket.
Yeah.
And so Vaughan's in the middle, or whatever. Again, there's lots of different ways you can go with that. And I think to launch an impassioned defence of Lewis Vaughan, not that you're digging him out, but like the next couple of chances I've got in my notes are both Vaughan chances. So one's the near post run from the corner. The next one is Hamilton kind of running in behind. He cuts it back. Vaughan, for me, I think just a lot of the chances that he doesn't take, I don't know if we get them if it's not him. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, listen, I'm quite happy to put my cards on the table here. I would more or less always have Lewis Vaughan in the park. If he's still moving, I'd have him in the park. Like, until the point where he's absolutely shattered. Because I just think he's got the real natural finishing ability that we just don't have otherwise. With the greatest of respect to the other forwards we've got and have had over recent seasons. He's got that really kind of irreplaceable quality. I just always like to have him kind of there or thereabouts. But as you say, obviously yesterday it didn't come off for him, but he's not a million miles away with some of these.
Yeah.
particularly that one for the corner, where he's just kind of the near post run, he just puts it there. Like, Toby Stewart makes a good block from that, but like so easily that could end up in the goal.
Yeah, and we've seen it before. Like, I know that he had the one as well where he tries to roll it, and St Johnstone are quick to block it at the throw-in. And again, it's not. It's probably quite easy to forget with hindsight about like the chances that do come up. And I know that we obviously watch the replays and you sort of see glimpses, but yeah, I just felt like there was the creativity aspect was one. And I get where you're coming from as well with it, because he really does create chances out of nowhere. And I think that's the difficulty in terms of the team that we've got, because trying to be able to utilise all the pieces when you've got so many players, because you don't want to pull off Dylan Easton because he's Dylan Easton. You don't want to pull off Lewis Vaughan because it's Lewis Vaughan. You want to be able to use guys like Richard Chin that are in a good vein of form, probably very, very confident after international duty. Paul McMillan creating assists, etc. Jack Hamilton, you need a focal point on the park. Even the guys like, for instance, we don't know what Josh Gentles can do yet. It's tough because you see all these players and the very, very good qualities that they've had, but then you've only got so many spaces up the top of the pitch.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I think we'll cover that kind of general question. I know I'm keen to hear what you think about the overall kind of use of the substitutes by the end of this one. But let's we'll do that at the end. We'll cover off the last couple of points here. So there is another chance. There's a chance for Jack Hamilton as well. He does really well to get up above Adam Forrester at the back post, but it's a tricky one to get too much power on. Toby Stewart gets behind it. By this point in the game, I mean, it is pretty end to end. So there's a couple of chances for Saints in there as well. One where I think it's Sidibe just can't quite get the ball out from under his feet and kind of can't quite force it towards the goal. The big other chance that they've got is Sven Sprangler, which incidentally is just a great name. Gets himself through and should probably do better with his header. Again, in common with a lot of the chances that were on target in this game, it actually ends up kind of straight at Josh Ray. And then we do get the second goal, which really kills the game. I've changed my views on this a little bit, having now seen the highlights. I thought it was kind of all Josh Ray's fault, effectively. That was my initial thought live. But actually, looking at it back, I think Ross Matthews might be the slightly bigger culprit here. Just in the sense that, obviously it's a breakaway and we kind of recover it. We sort of escape the initial high adrenaline, it was your set piece, but you've lost the ball. It gets knocked back to Ray. I mean, what is supposed to be his boot up the park, it's not great, but it's also not, he doesn't sort of slice it straight to a guy who's 30 yards out. He puts it a fair bit up the park, and then just as it's kind of put back towards him, Ross Matthews, I think, is just on his heels, and it's Sven Sprangler again is on his toes. He gets a wee touch away, and then I think Josh Ray's got to come for that. He's just, half a second too late, if that, split second too late. Sprangler knocks the ball to Josh McPake, and it's an easy finish. Too harsh to criticise this stage of the game? Do these things just happen when you're chasing a game?
I mean, I think I've just got it up now, and it's easy for me as a fan, I think, to say Ross Matthews, just clatter him. Because that's what you're looking at and you're probably thinking. And I'm sure that's what Ross Matthews, if you give him like 10 times to do it again, he's going to do it every time. But yeah, it's just, again, it's much like the first goal in that there's just several errors. You're not going to sort of dig anyone in particular out about them. I think that, if it doesn't fall to the feet of Josh McPake, it's going to be a red card for Josh Ray for it. But look, it was just an unfortunate way to end the game, given how many opportunities we sort of half chances that we had. We never had anything that was particularly outrageous misses, I would term. But at the same time, we still had plenty that you could look at and sort of say, we were in the game, we were chasing it, and then it was just an unfortunate end to put it up to a 2-0 rather than could easily have been a 1-1. I think that game.
Yeah, it's almost if the original breakaway goes through and ends in the goal, you're just kind of like, these things happen. It's the fact that we do, I just kind of recover that and then end up losing the goal anyway. That's the slightly frustrating element of that. But that kills the game 2-0. It was never going to finish anything other than that. So, I mean, in terms of just to kind of wrap up a little bit, I know you want to have a wee chat around kind of substitutes in general. Just quickly talk about a couple of things Barry Robson said, first of all. So I kind of agree with his main thesis of his 5-minute post-match interview, which is it's a very high-quality championship game. I kind of agree with that. I think it was two sides playing relatively well. It didn't always translate into like silky soccer or anything like that. But, we've seen enough two sides who are bad slugging out championship games, whereas I thought both sides did well enough, almost. He says it was won and lost on the mistakes. I can agree with that as well. Or kind of, you take your chances kind of idea. But we also said it didn't deserve to lose the game. He says, I don't think we did enough to win it. I don't think we deserve to lose the game, which the Courier picked up as their headline. Would you agree with that, Robbie?
Well, I mean, they scored 2 goals and we didn't, and ultimately they were clinical, and you've got to give them credit. I think that, look, it was... I don't find it too outrageous. Like, I know Barry Robson rustles the jimmies of a lot of people, so to speak, with his post-match interviews. And obviously,
me sometimes.
And that's fair. I also do think that the Courier have got a job to do in terms of trying to hash out as many articles about St Johnstone as they possibly can. Which, again, fair enough. That's a remit. I'm looking forward to 4 ways that Simo Valakari cooks eggs in the Courier over the next week. But it's I wouldn't be overly. I feel like he's made far more egregious statements before. He didn't really particularly we've seen before games where he's spoken about surfaces, spoken about penalty decisions, referees. Wasn't any of that. I think it's fair to attribute it to our own sort of downfall of our own making there. But I think the thing for me to look at it is that a lot of people had us sort of potentially being 4th place, but probably sitting about 6th in the league, and they had St Johnstone, after the League Cup, St Johnstone were probably down as favourites, given how County had been poor, and that's obviously grown over time. Still in and about that place, aren't we? There's a lot of teams in that pack at the moment. Dunfermline pick up a big win yesterday, Partick Thistle win on Friday night, even if they didn't play great at stages. And Ayr have just got a lot of signings back, or a lot of players back from injury. So, there's a fair number of teams in and about that probably feel quite optimistic going forward. Everything's still to play for. It's only the first quarter, and all we can do is, we're not going to get dragged into anything or get too upset by a loss against a team. And I do think that it is fair to point out about the money that's St Johnstone. I don't think they're Ross County by any stretch of the imagination. I would caveat that. But there's clearly going to be a financial disparity between the teams, given that they've run at a net profit over the last few years. Again, I think that you're very naive if you're going into this and sort of saying, it goes back a long, long way in terms of the history of the two clubs. And 30 years ago, they were on a very even keel. St Johnstone get a stadium for free. We don't. We've got to pay for a 10,000-seater stadium. You can take this far back as you want. Ultimately, they've been very, very well managed over the last 30 years, and that is to their eternal credit. They deserve that. That's fair, and that gives them their standing. But the financial, the reality is that there is a big imbalance between the two teams, certainly in terms of what they can offer. And I know that we sort of spoke about that point at the start. The fact that you've got Sam Stanton who you would expect would have been one of our top earners, given when he signed his last contract with us. He was very much the player in the league. To bring him in basically just to be a squad player and bring him on when you need to. I don't know if that's circumstantial or whatever. They can do that. We can't. It's a far bigger gamble for us to bring in terms of contracts and signing players and the bodies. So yeah, I know that we've wound them up a bit about the bloated squad, which has been fun, but yeah, there is definitely a financial disparity, and that's due to the way that Scottish football works. And there's always, I suppose it works for every level of football, doesn't it? There's always a sort of quote unquote bigger fish out there. I know that St Johnstone maybe don't have the crowds as such of the likes of a Dunfermline or even a Falkirk out there, but they've still been continually successful at the top flight, and they've got a lot more to show for it. Fair fucks to them.
I feel like you're trying to goad me into talking about prize money again. I'm steadfastly refusing.
Graham is currently shouting out in his car just parachute payments.
But yeah, I'm really trying not to do it. But to be fair, actually, I don't think Barry Robson in that post-match interview, I think specifically mentions the finances. What he does say is he's like, they've got Premiership quality players, and that's true. Like, I don't think he's saying like,
because he says about the investment that they've had.
Yeah, which I mean, to be fair, it's whether he says it explicitly or not, it means the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the. So actually, on that single 90 minutes, do I think, the Rovers didn't deserve to lose? Probably not. Again, as I say, I just think the fact that St Johnstone were winning after 25 minutes or whatever it was is vital context. Even if you go, well, it was, a relatively even game, the onus was on us, and I don't think we did enough.
I think if you're going to say one thing, though, or if I was going to say one thing, it's not an unassailable task by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think it's like, oh my God, it's Real Madrid that we're playing.
This is the thing. That's, as I say, that was almost, I mean, not to that level, but that was like a little bit of my fear almost going into it. Was like, actually, as I say, I thought when we played them at McDermott Park in the League Cup, I don't think we played well, first of all, but I thought they played very well. I thought they looked very good, and they looked like they had levels to go to. Whereas that game yesterday was much more even. And yeah, as I say, on balance, I think St Johnstone did deserve to win, but it wasn't. It looked like two sides in the same division, put it that way.
Yeah.
It was I would go so far as it was an even contest. I don't think that's contradictory to say that it was an even contest, but they deserved to win it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a battering. It wasn't, they didn't have us penned in at any point. And yeah, as I say, like what I said at half time, I wasn't particularly disheartened after that. I was like, we get beat, but like, it's going to happen. You're going to lose games sometimes. I felt the same at Firhill. And it's obviously slightly easier to have that attitude when you're coming off whatever it is, 1 loss in 14 going into yesterday. But it felt like there was a lot to like, or at least there wasn't a lot to dislike, really. But in terms of things to dislike, as I say, I know you want a bit of a chat around about kind of subs and that. So in the end, Robson makes 2 substitutions in the game. So he's got a 9-man bench. There's no longer the kind of couple of youth players really filling that bench. It's now kind of full professionals, if you want to include your Rangers loan players in that. But as I say, in the end, he only uses Jack Hamilton and Richard Chin. Do you think there's a case to be made for a little bit more turning to the bench?
Yeah, I mean, I would have been kicking the can down the road if not, and just dragging people's time out, basically. But no, I do think there was a case to be utilised and sort of more of the squad there. I know that I've mentioned them before. We've not seen them yet, but I think that would have been good to maybe see Josh Gentles on the park. Just something a bit different. He's not had the opportunity to get on. We know that he's played Youth International for Wales. Ironically, I won't get you onto the cooperation agreement of it all because I know how much that grinds your gears. But yes, he's played for Alloa, keen to see what he can offer, what he can bring to the table, and maybe yesterday would have been a good opportunity to do that. Same as well with Paul Niso, who's obviously signed on Friday. Mate, I don't think Scott Brown had a very good game yesterday. Again, not a shocker.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Again, Niso brings something legs to the table in terms of potentially being able to get about the pitch and being able to sort of add a bit of dynamics to it. These are players that we've not seen yet, so it's easy to speculate. But again, we have Darrell O'Connor, Jay Rowe as well. Jay Rowe, I mean, I'd hope that, again, we'll probably speak about it in sort of pre-match and Airdrie, but I'd be open to him coming back into the team. I think that, I know that I spoke about it with Alan, but I do sort of wonder whether sort of Barry Robson's like the Tiger King almost as such to throw back to this sort of lockdown. I know that we'd said before about the Tiger cages, but he just sits there and prods and maybe waits and makes them bide their time until they do get into the team. We saw it before with Sean Byrne, so
yeah, exactly.
It might be the same, that he's just wanting to lay that level of sort of like saying, look, if you're getting back into this team, you're getting a chance, but you need to be aware that like you've got to take this.
Yeah, I think rumours of Jay Rowe's demise have been exaggerated, would be my best guess. Just in the same way that, whatever it was, 6 weeks ago, it was like, oh, Sean Byrne's been frozen out. Barry Robson must hate Sean Byrne. How come Sean Byrne can't get any time at all? These were all things I was saying. But Sean Byrne came back in and has played every minute since. Because as it turns out, it wasn't an overriding impression. It wasn't a blanket approach. It was for those previous games, Barry Robson hadn't fancied Sean Byrne on a game-by-game basis. And then once he did, he was quite happy to play him every minute of every game afterwards, or, as near as makes no difference. Which is not to say that it's right or wrong, but it's to say that just because Jay Rowe, or Ewan Wilson, or Darrell O'Connor hasn't had any minutes recently, there's absolutely nothing to say that the next one of them that does come on might then not give up a jersey for 8 weeks. Like, that just seems to be kind of Barry Robson's way. And I don't necessarily always agree with it. I think my default position was actually, I think we would say generally, I think managers should be making more substitutions and they should be making them more often.
Yeah.
Actually. For certain like-for-like changes. Because you've got 5 subs to make now, and you've got 9 guys on the bench. But it seems like, kind of generally, football-wise, we're still in a bit of a kind of 3 subs mindset. I don't want to make too many changes too early in case, I'm limiting my own options. You've got 5 subs to make. Like, if you've got 2 different kind of mercurial wingers, just give them both 45 minutes. I don't know why more guys aren't doing that. But in terms of Barry Robson, and this is my usual just kind of Stockholm Syndrome, choosing to take the most positive interpretation I possibly can do. Regular listeners of this podcast will have heard me before kind of moaning about managers who change it too quickly, particularly when Ian Murray was kind of, and Neil Collins as well, like changing the whole thing at half-time. You're like, have a bit of confidence in your original idea. Like, you spent a whole week thinking this was the best way to win this game, and it's taken 45 minutes for you to abandon it. Barry Robson's almost the opposite of that. It's like he's got so much courage in his convictions. It's like, no, these are the 11 guys I think can win this game. And it actually takes quite a lot for him to then start changing it. So, I mean, I think the best counter-argument, not that we're having an argument, but the best counter-argument to the point you've made there, I think, is the guys that you've listed, which is Josh Gentles, never seen him play football before.
Yeah.
People who support Alloa have done, and he was fair enough, but untested at this level. Paul and Seal, exactly the same. Completely untested at this level. So you're like, Ty Montague is probably your next attacking option who's there. He's looked decent. He looked decent up at McDermott Park. but I don't know. For me, there's not really a compelling argument for any of these guys.
I know with certainly with Darrell O'Connor, you're not going to be mixing up your defence. But even when Paul Hanlon did go injured, it was straight away to O'Connor. So we saw the next sort of step for that. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think, don't get me wrong, like Barry Robson's pretty clearly quite, intransigent, if that's the right word. Doesn't like making changes from week to week, doesn't like making changes during the game, if he can help it. But at the same time, when he has made changes, they seem to have gone all right. All right, we still get beat at Firhill, but the change that he made got us back into the game. Went more direct at Morton last week. That worked out. I don't think really you could say that the approach they had yesterday didn't really work. Like, I don't know. Was there an approach? Was there a system and a set of players you could put out there that won us that game comfortably? Like, maybe, I suppose. But I don't particularly think there was any egregious errors or anything particularly that I was like, I really wish he'd put this guy on or put that guy on. Not like the end of last season when Jamie Gillan was knackered and he was just leaving him lying out there. No, not anything kind of as egregious as that. Right, Robbie, we've been on for ages and ages, now in 15 minutes since just me and you. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave us with on Raith Rovers and St Johnstone 2?
No, I think it's a good point to park it and probably come back to sort of these selection choices when we do the pre-match for next game against Airdrie. I think the overriding feeling for me is that it's something that you've said, but it's certainly not the end of the world or the end of the campaign by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot to still like about this team and to be positive. And I think as well, it's good food for thought as well, as you say. Like, again, I've mentioned about Lewis Vaughan coming off, but you make the very valid points that he's had the chances. And I think that, again, going forward, maybe it'll just be a change of system as to where we go. And we do see him and Hamilton come in and being able to be utilised. But again, we'll park that conversation for another day.
Yes, we'll have an hour and 20 minutes to fill on Thursday night or something as well. So
Stevie Gray will be delighted about
it. Yes, we will be back later in the week. I don't know if it'll be Wednesday or Thursday, but it'll be at some point. We'll look forward to a trip to Danny Lennon's Airdrie next weekend. And we will, of course, speak to you again then. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Goodbye.